Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be spending some time talking with Dr. Elisabeth Ignasiak. Elisabeth has been helping a number of small and medium-sized German companies through their transition into ESRS reporting, and particularly with the double materiality assessment. So this video is going to be me talking to her about these experiences and about how things are going in that market space. We'll go straight into the conversation with Elisabeth introducing herself, and then we'll start talking about some of the activities that we've been doing and some of her findings in delivering double materiality in particular in practice.
My background is in astrophysics, so I did my PhD studying supernovae, which is star explosions. And it was actually during my PhD that I started to look more into sustainability. First, it started more in terms of human rights, and then, one thing leads to another. And by the time I reached climate change, I was like, oh, wow. And if you read those things like the IPCC reports with a bit of a scientific background, because at the time I was doing science, it was clear to me that I couldn't just keep looking at the stars while our own planet is burning. So that's when I knew that, okay, I have to switch careers and I have to go into sustainability. And then moving into corporate sustainability and consulting was a bit of a longer path that I will spare you. I started just with normal consulting, so just making the switch from academia into going to a big company that does consulting, and I did IT strategy for a while. And so a long path towards sustainability, but it really started during my PhD.
Do you find that some of those hard science skills help with your delivery of sustainability content, or is it purely, yeah, I see a cat. Was it purely a vehicle for you internally to move from, doing astrophysics to sustainability, or is there a professional application there as well?
Not directly. I mean, astrophysics is very abstract. There's not much that applies to our real life on Earth here. What I do use every day is, one, just my skill to understand what is bullshit and what is science. That I definitely use on a day-to-day basis, because sustainability is quite complex, and so understanding these complex issues is definitely something that helps me. And then it's just the fact that I can learn complex topics very quickly. And I have also learned during my PhD to explain difficult topics in a simple way. And these are just skill sets that I honed during my PhD.
Your sort of current focus at the moment is on the ESRS, I understand, and with mostly sort of medium-sized companies. What are you mostly focusing on now?
So I mostly work with the businesses that have to report in 2026 about 2025. So it's that second wave of businesses, according to the ESRS. And that means I've mostly been doing double materiality analysis so far. And now I'm coming to the point where many of my customers are now moving into the data collection process. Then there's things like stakeholder engagement that I do for some clients, those that don't want to do it themselves. And I'm also actually creating a little Excel template at the moment for IRO evaluation, because I have some customers that don't want to use software. So then you have to find other solutions. And in this case, it's going to be Excel. And finally, I also try and help customers in finding the right software if they do want to use software, because that can also be very challenging for them, because if you don't understand the whole ESRS process, it's actually kind of tricky to then pick the right software to help you in that process.
Yeah. What do you find then is the main reason the companies are asking for support at the moment? Is it purely because of familiarity with the ESRS itself, or is there a broader reason being that sustainability is new in principle for a lot of these companies, or is it purely down to the technicalities of the ESRS, do you think?
I would say it's mostly due to the technicalities of the ESRS. So, and the reason I'm saying that is that I see both companies that have been dealing with sustainability in the past and those ones that haven't, and their questions are all similar and mainly going in the directions of, how do you do this and this within the context of the ESRS? They are, because it's quite new for many. They are struggling just in knowing, what is an IRO, how do you do double materiality? Like they see this list of more than 1,000 data points and they like panic. So they need a lot of guidance in just getting through this first year of doing the ESRS. And I suspect that once they've done it once and gotten more familiar, that the demand also for external help will also reduce, at least when it comes to these technicalities.
The guys that are then preparing to report for the operational year 2025 in 2026, these are the ones who are starting to do the double materiality now. Is that right?
Depends. So now we have the early movers, the ones that are basically trying to finish in 2024 the double materiality so that they know in 25 which data they need to collect to then report on, in 2026. And I suspect that we'll have a second wave of businesses that are gonna do the double materiality also in 2025, even though 25 is the reporting year that they're affected by. So I think there's a bit of the early movers and the late movers and now we're basically at the border between those two, between the years 2024 and 25.
Are the ones that are collecting or doing their double materiality now, so they go into the new year, in theory, already with a reasonable idea of what their scope will be? Do you get a sense that they're quite relaxed about it because they are starting now, or is there still a sense of sort of trepidation and mild panic, even though they're starting so early?
So I would say in just my sample of businesses that I work with, I would say most of them are reasonably relaxed and some do panic. But I would say the ratio, without having measured it, is roughly, let's say, 80-20,
Okay.
80 are reasonably relaxed and then the other 20 are like, ah.
What are the sizes of the teams? So we're talking about largely SMEs for you, I understand. What are the sizes of the teams they have that are dedicated, let's say, dedicated to double materiality and reporting, as opposed to the functions they pull in for technical input? Let's say just the dedicated team. What sizes are you seeing?
Between 1 and 5, roughly. So most of them are 2, 3, but then some have a bit larger teams where they actually do this in a larger group, especially if they're more complex organizations with a holding and a lot of sub-entities. So then it tends to be somewhat larger groups, but most of them I see are 2 or 3 people. And sometimes I see where it's just one person coordinating everything.
Are they doing other sustainability tasks as well, or are they just able to spend all of their time on this? Do you know?
I think that most of them are trying to do this and something else. So it's not their only thing, but it's, on top of whatever else they do. Though it's not just sustainability professionals that I work with. So there's also quite a few businesses, especially the ones for whom sustainability is new, where it would be a compliance manager or someone from the marketing team, or sometimes it's the financial team that are like now growing into the sustainability role, but it wasn't theirs before.
So aside from then the ESRS work that you're doing, is there other demand for your services? Are you working with companies on other aspects that are not ESRS related, or is it really just full go? Everybody wants to get through their kind of initial ESRS mountain, or are you doing other stuff and you're able to support companies in other ways as well?
Yeah, I do some other things. So, for example, one thing that is also in the reporting realm, I was recently working with another customer to help them get an ISO certification, and basically was accompanying them through the whole process, writing the report, having conversations with auditors, basically helping them along the whole process of getting certified. So that's something. And by the way, they did get the certification, which I was really happy about. Then another area I work on is climate. So doing corporate carbon footprints. So for example, for a church foundation, a consultancy, an IT business, or PCFs. So I had an interesting one recently for a client in the film and TV industry. PCF is a product carbon footprint, or also within the realm of climate, helping a small NGO with a climate policy paper. So these are like other topics that are not ESRS, which maybe also helps me to not go mad, to have a little bit of variation outside of the realm of the ESRS.
Are these the organizations you're working for? You mentioned a couple that are sort of NGO type sounding. Do you find that the SME companies are still wanting to do these other activities, or are they having to focus on the ESRS right now because that's just where everybody is?
I would say that those companies that have to do the ESRS, I think for those, that is indeed the main focus at the moment. Though because now they're all doing double materiality, and once they start doing the whole data collection, I believe new topics will start, right? Because you have to report also about your strategy. And so I think a lot of businesses will then think, oh, wait, we don't have a strategy. What comes now? So there will be other projects coming. Having said that, the ones that are affected by ESRS, at least, within my sample of customers, that is their primary focus, and just because it's so new and a lot to deal with at once. So that's what I'm seeing with my customers. And the ones where I do other topics are actually the ones that are not affected by the ESRS. So yeah, that's what I'm seeing right now.
Is there an argument here then that the ESRS is distracting companies from their sustainability efforts in some way? Do you think that argument has got currency?
I don't think so, because I also work with a lot of businesses that are doing or dealing with sustainability reporting now because they have to. So what does that tell you? That regulation is necessary, right? So they're not, some transform voluntarily, and there's always been the idealists, but the many do it because they have to. And the second thing that I think is quite interesting, so working with these businesses that are now doing sustainability for the first time, when you do double materiality and you have to deal with your own impacts, meaning the impacts of the company on various environmental and social topics and governance, of course, it actually does something with people. And it's really nice to see that transformation when they realize, oh, wow, these are our impacts, and these, we actually are also affected by physical climate risks in a financial way. It's really nice to see that transformation that happens within people when they suddenly have to deal with these topics. So yes, it is complex. Could it be simpler? Probably. At the same time, I do think it's helping these businesses to start the transformation that they have to. and that they otherwise wouldn't, and maybe would lose business long term because of it.
This isn't a question, but I'll sort of tell a story, then maybe you can add your perspective. Very similar to what you're saying. So one thing I've noticed, and I do, some of the same things as you, I've been helping some companies out with their materiality as well. One thing I've noticed is that the way the ES is structured it, obviously very close to the GRI in terms of how impacts are assessed, the new version of the GRI, the 2021 version, and relying on the old NFRD. What I've realized is that for companies who are seeing this for the first time, it is impactful. I shouldn't use that word. It is helping them change because it is systematic. It's because it is not ad hoc. And my feeling is that in the past, sustainability efforts have been ad hoc because there have been so many variant approaches, frameworks, methodologies, and it's been entirely voluntary for the most part. There's been no consistency, and companies have been able to just pick and choose the bits they want to do, despite the frameworks, the older materiality that the GRI used to have. It was still very, very subjective and enabled and allowed for a lot of cherry picking. So what I've seen is that by going through this double materiality process, by having the very kind of fixed set of sustainability matters, by saying this is an impact, you must consider the entire value chain, this is a risk, this is an opportunity, and being quite explicit about how these things should be named, described, and assessed, it seems to me that one of the main benefits is it's systematic, and it's sort of forcing companies to capture more and be more thorough than perhaps they were before, even the ones that were doing this before. Is that your impression as well?
Yeah, I think it's quite in line with my observation, what I mentioned earlier. Like, let's take something like biodiversity. The first reaction of many businesses, oh, it doesn't affect us. But then when you dig deeper and you ask questions, okay, what about your value chain? Do you build new buildings? Do you do soil sealing? And we've had this discussion before, and suddenly you see, oh, wait, actually there is something there. And the same happens with the financial aspects. When you talk about climate, like, are you taking any mitigation efforts? Do you know what your physical climate risks are? How at risk are you of your offices, of your factories getting going underwater in a really strong rain and things like that, or being affected by storms? It does something where they start realizing that actually these topics do matter, where before they maybe didn't consider them as strongly as before. So I think that's quite in line with what you're saying as well.
Yeah, a sort of analogy I kind of pops into my head is this: don't forget to vacuum under the table after breakfast. It's sort of like, you vacuum your lounge and you're in the thoroughfare and you kind of feel like you've done the vacuuming, but after breakfast, there's always crumbs under the table. And I sort of feel like what the ESRS is doing is saying, don't forget to also vacuum under the table. Don't forget to check behind the couch. It's just a little bit more thorough. And I know it could be taken to the extreme, and there are some arguments that it is too detailed, right? It wants people to get toothpicks out and move every book off the shelf and get every little last speck of dust. I don't think we have to go to that extreme, but it seems to be helping companies to not overlook these things, that it would have been reasonable to consider them. They just haven't been put into a systematic frame where it's kind of forced them to consider them.
Yeah. And I do understand that it is complex, and especially when it's new, and 300 pages of ESRS text are not the easiest to read. So I do understand the struggle. And I'm not a policymaker, but maybe it could have done in a simpler way. I don't want to say that it has to be this difficult. At the same time, I do think it's important to see that it also is helping a transformation that has to happen anyway. I'm deeply convinced that the future is sustainable. There's no other alternative, and the sooner businesses get on the path, the better for them and their future of their businesses. Like there's no way around it. And so yes, you can fight about the details of policy, but in the end, at the end of the day, it's necessary that we have it and that businesses start with the transformation. And I mean, that's what you and I are trying to do. You in terms of providing the software, and me in terms of consulting, is trying to help them do this transformation in a simple and pragmatic way as it can be, you know.
What skills do you think then for sustainability professionals, particularly those who are joining the profession, they've either come from another professional background and their company has asked them to take the reporting burden on their shoulders, or if they're recently graduating and entering the workforce for the first time? Because I think in both cases, whether you're moving across or coming into the profession from university or from another form of education, what is it about sustainability that is different, that kind of the skill set or the breadth of skills or the things that you think sustainability professionals should be kind of trying to focus on to make it easier for them?
I mean, I think this, like 5 years ago, the answer would have been completely different. I think, first of all, just in terms of skills, I think you need to be friends with complexity. You need to love to learn, and you need to be able to problem solve. I think that's just essential, because it's the topics are getting more complex. You need to be able to collaborate with other people, because we're getting to a stage where, you know, one single person usually doesn't know enough to solve these things. So this, you know, just in generic skills. And I would say just in terms of knowledge, dealing with regulation and reporting, I would say those are the big ones. Like, you, at the end of the day, you need to be familiar with the regulations. And I think that still a lot of people who want to transition into sustainability still have a bit more, let's say, naive and at this point outdated view of what it means to be a sustainability professional, that is more idealized in saying, oh, we work on the transformation. And I think at the end of the day, it's more, more of those hard skills and knowledge of, like, knowing your regulation, like dealing with complex problems, collaborating, like these. I think it probably looks different than what people think it looks nowadays. And yes, there is also strategy out there to do, but if you want to make a living in this business, I think that's not enough to build on.
One of the biggest gaps that I've sort of observed, and it's in the last 2 years, it's really since the CSRD and the ESRS came along, is the willingness and the aptitude to read these very boring, long, and complicated documents. And I know that I'm lucky because I'm obviously a native English speaker, and a lot of these regulations were first drafted and released in English, and the guidance is in my native tongue, almost all of it. So I have an advantage there. And I also, because I come from the sustainability background that I have, is related to the planning regime, impact assessment, and town and country planning in New Zealand and in the United Kingdom. And here we were heavily governed by regulation. Every planning decision had to be legal. Every planning application was very, very strict in the content that was allowed to be in it and how we should describe impacts and how significance was all determined. All of these things have been historically very, very rigid in the sustainability, sort of part of sustainability that I come from. So I got lucky that when the ESRS and the directives came along, it was all very normal to me because I've spent a lot of my career reading legislation. I totally get it, though, that if you've come into sustainability and you've kind of been thinking about it more transformatively and you're passionate about sustainability in your private life and you want to help companies go green, and then the first thing you're confronted with is hundreds of pages of legal text, that is a shock. And so I would just encourage, sustainability professionals, you've got to try and somehow overcome that burden, face that evil fear, and start reading these documents and start trying to get, because one thing I realized, and I actually talked to my colleagues about this at the very start when we first started reading them, it's like osmosis. Eventually, it just gets in your blood. You don't realize, but you'll just be sitting down one day having a conversation with someone, not privately, professionally. You'll be having a professional conversation, and you'll just realize that you and the person you're talking to have just been dissecting paragraphs of the ESRS without having the document in front of you. And what that means is the document has got inside your head, right? You've been reading it, you've been texting it, you've been messaging and emailing bits of this and screenshotting this thing for so many months now. Parts of it are actually in your brain. And I think that's just one of the skills that will happen, but I think you've had a similar experience.
I'm smiling because I had a friend over this weekend, and we were talking, the friend, my husband and I, and they were talking about their companies, and I was sitting there thinking, I wonder what it would be like to do the double materiality for their business.
Yeah.
And so, and maybe to add to what you said, yes, you have to read these texts, and you also need to be aware that it's not the only one that you have to read. It's gonna continue. Once this wave is over, everyone understands the ESRS, the next one will come, and the next one, and the next ones, and it's not gonna get any easier. So you really have to be comfortable with that, not just the initial hurdle, but being aware that it's gonna continue in this way. So maybe that's
there's an element of getting left behind now with this. There's the real risk of stagnating. I can say, the sector standards for the ESRS, the oil and gas draft is out. We'll see sector standards coming along. How am I going to juggle all of those? CBAM, we've got deforestation regulation, European-wide supply chain. Taxonomy is a complicated beast. So it's not going to end. It may end if the political landscape changes dramatically, but it won't change practice much. Because once these approaches get embedded in companies, they're not going to then spend huge amounts of money if they want to stay with some sustainability program. They're not going to then spend huge amounts of money dropping it for a voluntary system. They will just keep them, the ones that have adopted them for the most part. So
I agree. I think, and to be honest, I think to some degree, businesses also understand that there's no way around it. Like whether it's regulation or not. I do think regulation is important to just speed things up, but one way or another, we have to transform. There's just no way around it, and I think by now that message has arrived. So even if you don't want to, as a business, your competitors will start doing it. You will be at a disadvantage. You will struggle to find employees because many people don't want to work for unsustainable businesses, and it's just going to be an increasing disadvantage if you just don't tackle it.
I think we see that already. We notice as a company that supplies these kinds of things as part of its core business, we notice the people that apply, and it's obvious that they are very, very keen to apply for these certain kinds of companies. They are definitely their preferences, right? It's not to say they wouldn't work elsewhere, but it's definitely their preference. So the companies that are, able to be leaders in this area will find hiring for the most part.
It is. I'm also hiring right now, and it's like everybody talks about struggling to find skilled workers, and I have so many applicants. I don't know, what to do with all of them. I would love to hire them all because there's a lot of really qualified people out there, and so I do think it's a huge advantage if you are a sustainable business to attract the right people.
Great. So on that note, something positive to think about for our sustainability efforts, employee attraction and retention.
Definitely. I think that's a big one.